Jephthah and the elders of Gilead seem to be taking care of business all on their own and then asking God to bless their plans. Have you ever done that? I have. We make our own plans when we're afraid God's plans might be different from what our flesh wants, or when we grow impatient waiting for God to make provision. After 7th season on the 80s television drama Dallas, actor Patrick Duffy decided he was going to leave the series. So in 1985, Patrick's character, Bobby, was written out of the show, tragically mowed down by a car, and leaving his television wife, Pamela, devastated. But ratings began to sag without Duffy, and in a stroke of infamous Hollywood writing, his character was brought back the next year on the premise that the entire previous season had simply been a bad dream of Pamela's. In today's Scriptureology lesson, we're going to see that writing people off doesn't necessarily mean they stay gone. Sometimes they reappear in scenes you could never imagine. Chapter 10 ends with the army of Israel encamped at Mizpah, awaiting an anticipated attack from the Ammonites who were amassed in Gilead. But the Israelite army had a problem. They didn't have a commander. Before we jump into chapter 11, let's take a look at a map just to get our bearings about where the action is taking place. Gilead is a region crossing the territorial allotments of the Israelite tribes of Gad and Manasseh. It's east of the Jordan River. The Ammonites live on the southern border in Gilead in the region of Ammon. But now the Ammonites are in the city of Gilead within the region of Gilead. It's indicated with a green oval, kind of like New York City is in the state of New York. There were several towns named Mizpah in biblical days. The most well-known was about 9 miles north of Jerusalem, but that's too far away from Gilead to launch an attack. The Mizpah referred to must have been one within Gilead itself, and its location is estimated to be about where the red star is. So now that we know where everyone is, let's see how the Israelite army goes about finding a commander. I'm going to be reading Judges chapter 11, verses 1 through 11. Now Jephthah the Gileadite was a mighty warrior, but he was the son of a prostitute. Gilead was the father of Jephthah, and Gilead's wife also bore him sons. And when his wife's sons grew up, they drove Jephthah out and said to him, "You shall not have an inheritance in our father's house, for you are the son of another woman." Then Jephthah fled from his brothers and lived in the land of Tob, and worthless fellows collected around Jephthah and went out with him. After a time, the Ammonites made war against Israel. And when the Ammonites made war against Israel, the elders of Gilead went to bring Jephthah from the land of Tob. And they said to Jephthah, "Come, be our leader, that we may fight against the Ammonites." But Jephthah said to the elders of Gilead, "Did you not hate me and drive me out of my father's house? Why have you come to me now when you are in distress?" And the elders of Gilead said to Jephthah, "That is why we have turned to you now, that you may go with us and fight against the Ammonites and be our head over all the inhabitants of Gilead." Jephthah said to the elders of Gilead, "If you bring me home again to fight against the Ammonites and the Lord gives them over to me, I will be your head." And the elders of Gilead said to Jephthah, "The Lord will be witness between us if we do not do as you say." So Jephthah went with the elders of Gilead, and the people made him head and leader over them. And Jephthah spoke all these words before the Lord at Mizpah. Chapter 11 starts out introducing us to a man named Jephthah. In the first verse, we're told 4 things about him. First, he's a Gileadite. So he's a native son of the land that the Ammonites are ready to fight for. He'd have a very personal interest in what happens there. Second, he's a mighty warrior. At some point, he's proven that he can fight. Third, we're told that his mother was a prostitute. She's not even a concubine of Jephthah's father. And then fourthly, we learn that his father was also named Gilead, like the town and the region. The text continues and discloses that Gilead's sons by his wife drive Jephthah away because they don't want to share their father's inheritance with him because he's the son of another woman, to put it delicately. But the fact that Jephthah was driven away indicates that he had been acknowledged and taken in by his father. Can you imagine being in his position and watching legitimate sons being born into your father's family and seeing them grow up and look down their noses at you? I wonder if it wasn't constant fights with those brothers that developed Jephthah's skill as a mighty warrior. Well, he's pushed out and he flees to the land of Tob, where he surrounds himself with worthless fellows. Okay, that's the same description that these new acquaintances are given that were used for the men that Abimelech hired to kill his half-brothers back in chapter 9. So in the first 3 verses of chapter 11, we're given this biography of Jephthah, and it becomes important as the text turns back to the issue at hand. Ammonites are on the doorstep of Israel, and they're ready to make war. The elders of Gilead remember the mighty warrior Jephthah. They go to him and ask him to be their leader. The Hebrew word used in verse 6 is qatzim, and it means leader or commander. It would be a high military position. But back at the end of chapter 10, when the elders of Gilead were just talking amongst themselves, they were looking for something else. The Hebrew word that they used then was rosha, which means head or chief. To be chief is not merely a military position, but it's a head of state position. But that's not what they are offering to Jephthah right now. Perhaps now that they know who they're going after, they might not think that the son of a prostitute is fitting to have the position of rosha or head of state. A general? That's okay. But Jephthah takes the opportunity to remind these elders that they drove him out of his father's house. Okay, wait a minute. Didn't verse 2 say that it was his half-brothers who drove him away? Who was it? According to the NIV application commentary on Judges, Jephthah's father would have had to adopt his son by a prostitute, or the inheritance issue wouldn't have been an issue. So presumably this happened since it is an issue. The half-brothers would then have had to make a case to the elders of Gilead in order to have Jephthah disinherited and driven away from his father's house. It seems the elders must have ruled against Jephthah. That's why responsibility for it can be ascribed to both the half-brothers and to the elders. So there's some history here between Jephthah and the elders, and he reminds them of it. Everyone's clear that the elders need Jephthah more than he needs them. So what do the elders do? They sweeten their deal. They offer him the chief or head of state position that they had originally been thinking of offering to the person who could lead their army. Now, this position is more to Jephthah's liking. He tells the elders that he'll take on the Ammonites, and if the Lord gives him victory, he expects that he will be their chief. It's not stated, but the expectation may also be implied that the elders would also reverse their decision on the matter of his family standing. It's hard to fathom that one could be both head of state and a disinherited son. Did you notice at the end of the text I read that both parties invoked the name of the Lord, using his covenant name at the conclusion of their negotiations? Okay, well, that's a good thing considering the apostate times that they were living in. It shouldn't escape our notice that we did not hear his name invoked on the front of things. There's no statement that God raised up for Israel a deliverer, as there is when other judges are raised. Jephthah and the elders of Gilead seem to be taking care of business all on their own and then asking God to bless their plans. Have you ever done that? I have. We make our own plans when we're afraid God's plans might be different from what our flesh wants, or when we grow impatient waiting for God to make provision. At the end of chapter 10, the people finally acknowledged their sin. But God rebuked them, and he told them to ask the gods that they had been worshiping to help them. The people persisted in asking God for deliverance, and in verse 16 of chapter 10, it says that God became impatient over their misery. The Hebrew word used there is katzar, and it means to be short, impatient, vexed, or grieved. It doesn't mean that he pitied or had compassion on them. It seems like God had had enough of them for a while, and he had nothing else to say at the moment. These people had been through several apostasy and deliverance cycles already, and it was time for some time out. We need to at least consider that God still employs that method of discipline for his people. And while he will never leave us or forsake us, he might exercise the option to remain silent until we're truly ready to listen and obey, not just because it's the expedient thing to do in the moment and will get us out of the jam that we're in, but out of a heart of love and faith. As believers, we're called to examine ourselves, and considering if God's silence in our lives is the wise response of a loving father to a self-directed child ought to be part of an honest examination. Well, imagine you're Jephthah. Your new deal is that if you defeat the Ammonite army, you become chief of your home region, including those miserable brothers that were too good for you. You might think, well, the sooner we get this party started, the sooner I start running the whole show in Gilead. You could hardly wait to strap on your sword. Or maybe not. My son Stephen is the family go-to guy for computer problems. Whether it's software or hardware, if something's not working and you're at your wit's end with it, Stephen can fix it. But sometimes Stephen's fixes are so simple that you just feel stupid that you didn't think of it before you called him in. Like your printer's out of paper or your mouse battery is dead. Stephen's taught me to start looking for the simple solutions first. I think Jephthah could have been an IT guy. He starts looking for the simple solution before he rushes into battle. So he sends messengers to the king of the Ammonites asking, "Why do you want to fight?" Brilliant place to start. The Ammonite king responds that he's unhappy that Israel took his land and please give it back. Then Jephthah gives a point-by-point argument concerning the error of the king's view. In summary, this is what he tells him. A, they didn't steal the land. They captured it in a battle with the Ammonites, who, by the way, took it from the Moabites. If Israel's claim to the land wasn't valid, then neither was the Ammonites' claim. B, when the people of the God of Israel gives them land, they accept it just like the Ammonites would when they credit their god, Chemosh, with battle victory. Hey, just a note about that. Jephthah got that part wrong. Chemosh was the god of the Moabites. The Ammonite god was Molech, so he made an oops. And then C, Jephthah noted that the Israelites had been in the land for 300 years already. Okay, the point being, and now you want to make an issue of us being here? Well, Jephthah's attempted diplomacy, it didn't work. The Ammonite king still wanted to fight, but I think it would have been funny if it had worked. Could you imagine the looks on the faces of the elders of Gilead if they had had to relinquish the chief position to the son of a prostitute after he made the Ammonite threat disappear? Just by asking. They would have felt so stupid for not trying the easy and obvious solution themselves. Okay, made me laugh just to think about it. So the fight is on. We'll see how it turns out right after this brief break. Is it sinful to doubt? Is God responsible when floods and earthquakes strike? What's a better question to ask than what would Jesus do? These questions and many more are dealt with in my recent book, Good Newspaper, My Season of Discipling a City. With transparency and humor, the book is meant to show believers how to live daily life looking through the lens of biblical truth. For a suggested donation of $15, I'll be happy to send one to you. You can order a copy on our website, Scriptureology.com, or by sending a check to P.O. Box 857, Versailles, Kentucky, 40383. 100% of your donation will go to support this discipleship program, and books do make great Christmas gifts. Before we continue with the battle, I want to take a minute and go back and talk about Jephthah's family. His high and mighty half-brothers, they probably never dreamed that this son of a prostitute could ever rise to a position of prominence, a position that they would be under the authority of. Wouldn't you have loved to have seen their faces when word got back to them who the new head of state was going to be after the battle was won? Don't you think that they were scrambling to adjust to their new reality? Maybe they were able to be reconciled to him, maybe not. But we shouldn't miss the obvious parallel to our Savior. No one was impressed with his pedigree, and there were rumors about his parentage too. His brothers weren't fans of his. And finally, he was driven out of the city. Jesus was driven out of Jerusalem by a mob eager to escort him to his execution. That mob, he probably also never dreamed that this Jesus would turn out to be the exalted King of heaven and earth. In the narrow parallel of their circumstances, Jephthah is a foreshadowing of our despised Savior, the Lord Jesus. And all people are going to have to decide if they are interested in being reconciled to the one that we've sinned against and the one who will judge us one day. Jesus himself said the Old Testament scriptures, they speak of him. And in this part of Judges, we get another glimpse of that. So now we'll pick up our lesson and we'll see what happens after the negotiations with the Amorites break down. As I read, listen for how little is said about the actual battle. I'm going to be reading Judges chapter 11, verses 29 through 40. Then the Spirit of the Lord was upon Jephthah, and he passed through Gilead and Manasseh, and passed on to Mizpah of Gilead. And from Mizpah of Gilead he passed on to the Ammonites. And Jephthah made a vow to the Lord, and he said, "If you will give the Ammonites into my hand, then whatever comes out from the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the Ammonites shall be the Lord's, and I will offer it up for a burnt offering." So Jephthah crossed over to the Ammonites to fight against them, and the Lord gave them into his hand. And he struck them from Aroer to the neighboring of Minnith, 20 cities as far as Abel-Kirikam, with a great blow, so the Ammonites were subdued before the people of Israel. Then Jephthah came to his home at Mizpah, and behold, his daughter came out to meet him with tambourines and with dances. She was his only child. Besides her, he had neither son nor daughter. As soon as he saw her, he tore his clothes, and he said, "Alas, my daughter, you have brought me very low. You have become the cause of great trouble to me. For I have opened my mouth to the Lord, and I cannot take back my vow." And she said to him, "My father, you have opened your mouth to the Lord. Do to me according to what has gone out of your mouth, now that the Lord has avenged you on your enemies, on the Ammonites." So she said to her father, "Let this thing be done for me. Leave me alone 2 months, that I may go up and down on the mountains and weep for my virginity, I and my companions." So he said, "Go." Then he sent her away for 2 months. She departed, she and her companions, and wept for her virginity on the mountains. At the end of 2 months, she returned to her father, who did with her according to his vow that he had made. She had never known a man, and it became a custom in Israel that the daughters of Israel went year by year to lament the daughter of Jephthah the Gilead 4 days in the year. I wonder if you're as dumbstruck as I am that the text says, "Then the Spirit of the Lord was upon Jephthah." God's last word to the Israelites was to go call for help to their other gods. But then, as soon as they're on the verge of war, God mercifully shows up, and his Spirit comes upon their self-appointed leader. There's only one explanation for that: grace. So the Spirit of the Lord is upon Jephthah, and on his way to battle, he impulsively vows to God that if he is given victory over the Ammonites, when he returns home, the first thing, whatever it is, that comes out of his house to greet him, he intends to dedicate to the Lord and offer it as a burnt offering. He is bargaining with God. Apparently, it's always been possible to act foolishly, even if the Holy Spirit has come upon you. We read that Jephthah's daughter is his only child, and she becomes the victim of his rash vow. It kills me that Jephthah seems to blame his daughter for the situation. He tells her, "You have brought me low, and you are the cause of great trouble." Nice. He portrays himself as the victim. Now, to his credit, Jephthah maintains that he cannot retract his vow. Now, as a general rule, that's true, but human sacrifice was forbidden in God's law, and a vow that results in sin, that couldn't possibly be acceptable to God. Besides, the Levitical law, it did provide in such an instance. This is what it says. If anyone utters with his lips a rash oath to do evil or to do good, any sort of rash oath that people swear, and it is hidden from him when he comes to know it, and he realizes his guilt in any of these, and confesses the sin he has committed, he shall bring to the Lord as his compensation for the sin that he has committed a female from the flock, a lamb or a goat for a sin offering, and the priest shall make atonement for him for his sin. That's Leviticus chapter 5, verses 4 through 6. So there was an out for rash vows that had been made. I wonder if it ever crossed Jephthah's mind that an unclean animal might have been the first thing to come out of his house, and he certainly couldn't have offered an unclean sacrifice. Or maybe did he consider that perhaps a neighbor might have been visiting his house, and the neighbor might have been the first to emerge, and he'd have no authority to kill a neighbor? It's certain that he never considered that his only child would be the first one to emerge from the house to greet him. Hey, now, there are commentators who make a very convincing argument from their knowledge of the Hebrew language that Jephthah never intended to barbecue his daughter. They point out that when Jephthah says that he will give or dedicate and offer whatever greets him as a burnt offering, the word "and" there could just as correctly be translated "or." Jephthah could have dedicated her to serve in the tabernacle for the rest of her life, or he could have barbecued her. Now, that makes sense that he would have intended dedicating to her, considering his daughter's request to go for 2 months and mourn her virginity. Why wouldn't she mourn for her life? The emphasis is made that when she returned to her father and he fulfilled his vow, it's emphasized that she had never known a man. And the daughters of Israel, they established a custom to lament, not to mourn, her every year. It was a lamentable tragedy for an Israelite woman to never have a family of her own. In fairness, though, it was also a tragedy to Jephthah because his lineage, it would come to an end with his virgin daughter. And I wonder if Jephthah ever in his whole life ever made another impulsive vow. I would think this one would have cured him. Now, if Jephthah wasn't dealing with enough, chapter 12 begins with an army from Ephraim on his doorstep, fighting mad because they weren't part of the fight. Hey, this was the same tribe that Gideon had to pacify for the exact same reason. Ephraim's apparently get all disgruntled and hostile if they do not share in the battle glory. Now, Gideon was able to pacify them by flattering the Ephraimites. Jephthah's not so fortunate. Jephthah tells Ephraim he did call them, but they didn't answer. And then he asks the same question that he asked the Ammonites. Why do you want to fight me? The men of Ephraim, they weren't any more open to discussion than the Ammonites were, and so a small civil war breaks out. Jephthah's strategy was to seize the fords at the Jordan River so that the Ephraimites were trapped and couldn't retreat or get reinforcements. But apparently some Ephraimites tried to disguise themselves as travelers and get back across the river. So Jephthah's Gileadites devised a verbal test to catch them. I remember hearing on a history program that during World War II, there was a code word used to identify authentic radio transmissions in the Pacific Theater. The word was Lollapalooza. The Japanese couldn't pronounce the L sound and said Raraparuza, so they weren't able to scam false information to the Americans. Now at the Jordan River, everyone who wanted to cross had to say Shibboleth. The men of Ephraim couldn't pronounce the sh, and they said Sibboleth. According to verse 6 of chapter 12, 42,000 Ephraimites were cut down at the river. That's a big number. In fact, this slaughter was so devastating to the tribe of Ephraim that they never again played any significant role in Israel's history. And the word Shibboleth, it's worked its way into our English dictionary. It means a peculiarity of pronunciation, behavior, mode of dress, etc., that distinguishes a particular class or set of persons. That's from dictionary.com. Chapter 12 wraps up by telling us that Jephthah judged Israel for 6 years, and then he was buried in his hometown of Gilead. And then there are 3 more judges that are introduced in quick succession. The first is Isbin of Bethlehem. Isbin has 30 sons and 30 daughters, so we assume he had a harem. And Isbin was distinguished for having married all of his children outside his clan. The practical reason for doing that would be building alliances and power bases beyond your current influence. He judged 7 years and was buried at home. The next minor judge was Elon the Zebulunite. All we know is that he judged 10 years and was buried at home. There doesn't seem to be one distinguishable fact about him. And the third minor judge is Abdon, the son of Hillel the Pirathonite. He too had lots of children and even grandchildren who rode on donkeys. Only the very rich had donkeys for all their children to ride. Donkeys were the BMWs of the day. Abdon judged Israel 8 years. The thing about all 3 of these judges is that we don't see them saving Israel from anyone or anything, and their tenures are relatively short. But their judgeships are a prelude to 40 long years of oppression of the hand of the Philistines.
This program is viewer-supported. If you appreciate in-depth Bible study on television, please consider supporting our ministry with a gift. You can contribute online at Scriptureology.com or at the address on your screen.